Hi, my name is Michelle Wong, and I'm the curator for this exhibition called Portal Stories and Other Journeys, co-presented by Asia Art Archive and Tai Kwun Contemporary, which is where we are now. In the next 20 minutes or so, what we'll do is sort of to walk through this exhibition together and look at some of the works more closely. This exhibition has new commissions by the artists Banu Janatoglu, Guan Shuanzi, Walid Rad, Rux Media Collective, and Lam Wingxi, and it also has some archival documents as well as restaging of historical objects. So we can sort of go walk together and take a look at it together. But I'm going to stop here, and before we look at the images on the glass door, just a few words about who Ha Baek-chun was. Ha Baek-chun was a Hong Kong artist who was born in Guangdong in 1925, came to Hong Kong via Macau in 1957, and passed away in Hong Kong in 2009. Materials including printed matter, photography, that AAA started working on in 2014. And this exhibition is very much sort of stemming from the research that we are able to do into Ha Baek-chun's archive and sort of creating this platform of questions and narratives where the archive is being presented as a creative space. And here you see sort of on the two sides are images of the archive, of Ha Baek-chun's archive in the studio in To Kwa Wan, sort of transforming throughout the years as we were processing it, moving it from one space to another, from To Kwa Wan to a project space. And this has very much sort of anchored this exhibition's approach of working with different contemporary artists, which is to turn this archive into a space of inquiry. And through that sort of inquiry into our sense of scale, our sense of history, and explore questions like that. One of the first steps that I like to sort of go into when we first go into this exhibition is this set called 1970s Hong Kong Restaurant, which is one way of us to literally restage Ha Baek-chun's sculpture work. As I was saying, Ha was a sculptor and printmaker, and sometimes it's very difficult to tell whether it's a print or sculpture that he was making. This work was first collected by the Hong Kong Museum of Art in 1967, and it's called Construction. It was collected as a wall-based work, but as we were researching into the archive, we found this sort of box called Restaurant Decoration, and found this image of a restaurant that has a ceiling decoration that looked very much like construction, and therefore we restage it that way. But one of the most sort of exciting discoveries of working on Ha's archive is to find his collage practice. What you're seeing here is a projection of our colleagues flipping through some of the collage books that Ha made. The earliest collage book that we were able to find dates 1958, so it's the year after Ha Baek-chun moved to Hong Kong. But Ha never really showed these collage books to the public, and so we found them after his death, and it was the artist Walid Rad who found it. And these books were sort of hiding in plain sight inside the studio, and Walid pulled one of these books out and asked us what it is. And we really didn't know. As you can see, these pages are sort of weirdly seamless, but you can clearly see that their sources come from different places. To date, we found over 300 of these collage books. And this is a reminder that, perhaps as archivists, we were so set on looking for the exhibition history in Ha's archive that we had forgotten that when an artist makes archiving his practice, it necessarily has to extend and exceed linear history. And you see Ha in his collages really sort of inserting these images of non-art, non-Western images into canonical sort of images to rewrite art history. And it's a very important reminder for us to sort of keep, not only look for things that we thought we knew, but to be open to different inquiries. And with that, let's sort of go look at another work. And this work, which is on my left, is the work by Guan Shuanzi called Iron Horse after Antonio Mack. A lot of us would know Antonio as a bronze sculptor in Hong Kong who died relatively young in 1995. And Azi had been looking for this particular sculpture work by Antonio Mack called Horse and Ladder, where Antonio replaced the torso of the horse with a ladder. But Azi couldn't find it for years, and in sort of a very interesting move, replaced the ladder with a barricade as a way, I guess, as a metaphor for the obstruction that he was encountering. The iron horse you're looking at now exists at first only as a digital collage, as an image. But we were able to find more images of horse and ladder that sort of inspired Azi to actually say, I would like to recast this horse into a bronze sculpture as a proxy for the lost Antonio work. And we'll look at some of these images later on as well. And one of the sort of most interesting things of working on the exhibition is to be able to bring the affective register that the archive is able to sort of give us an experience that is sort of beyond information. And the work here, which is by Rux Media Collective, is a very good example. Rux came to Hong Kong to do an artist residency with AAA in 2016. And by that time, Habek Chun's studio was very much sort of falling apart, and we had to introduce sort of foreign materials into the archive to protect it, such as Tyvek. And Rux sort of took these materials with them in their minds and transformed their experience with the archive into this composite creature, which sort of like hugs you as you sit with it. And there's a fan of a speaker that talks to you. And one of the lines says, when a photograph is a photograph of a photograph, meaning is only possible when promises begin to break. And with sort of these sort of meditative lines and the LED monitors, which is another form of meditation through primary colors, you really get to experience that affective register that an archival exhibition is not necessarily always bringing with you. And behind the Rux work, what you see is a work by the Hong Kong artist Lam Wing Si, who is 70 years younger than Ha, but has a very similar practice. But being so many years younger than Ha meant that Ha inhabits a very different world and has a very different relationship with technology. And so with her invitation, what Asi has done is to remix very boldly her own images with Habek Chun's images as a commentary as well as a critique. So you actually see her documenting through photography and through video of places that Ha went to, and also taking sounds from that and remixing it. And what happens is a visual narrative that sort of meditates on what does it mean to be temporarily inhabiting someone else's practice, and to think of the differences and just the different perspectives of looking at the world. The next set that we look at is called the Archivist Table, which is sort of, I guess, a very distilled selection of archival materials from the huge collection of material that Ha left behind. Most of these are exhibition history materials that we believe are very important for Hong Kong's writing of art history. And here you see a different selection of printed matter as well as photography. And we can look more closely at this ensemble of images, which directly, indirectly inspired Guan Shenji's Iron Horse work. And here you see, this is Antonio Mack, and a work that he made called Horse and Ladder in 1982. Horse and Ladder has been lost since 1982. But with Habek Chun's documentation, we were able to see when and where it was exhibited. And it was in Manila in 1982 as well. So here you see Horse and Ladder being exhibited. And you also get to see quite sort of playful images of artists emulating the work horsing around. And when Guan Xuanji saw this ensemble of images in 2018, that's when he came up with the idea of casting that bronze horse. And as we walk along sort of these vitrines, you see a different sort of selection of exhibition documentation, some of them in museums, some of them self-organized spaces. But our favorite, I guess you can say, is this one, called New Loting Archaeological Find, which was curated by Oscar Ho, at the time still at the Hong Kong Art Center as the exhibition director. And he turned Art Center into sort of a fake archaeological site, where artists of this exhibition were fabricators of artifacts, as well as the excavators of the artifacts. And it was in this occasion that he invented this figure called Lo Ting, which was half human, half fish, and sort of this mythical, I guess, origin or ancestor of people who live in Hong Kong. And of course, we must go look for this Lo Ting sculpture, and we found it in Oscar's office in the university. You know, so this object that was emerging from a confused archaeology and a confused history was falling apart. And so what we did was to work with more artists, including Anti, who is a painter, and as well as a conservator of wax models. And we recasted this Lo Ting sculpture into fiberglass and placed it behind a screen such that what you see first is shadow when you first enter the exhibition space. One of the things that a lot of us found very fascinating with Ha's archiving practice is how he was like so obsessively photographing exhibitions and things. And he left behind this huge collection of contact sheets. And we were able to digitize these contact sheets and transform those analog materials into what you see here as a digital touch screen. These are indexical records of what Ha was seeing as an exhibition goer. And sort of it gives you also a feel of what Ha was looking at, as well as how Hong Kong was like. You see him sort of photographing daily life here. Ha photographed over 2,500 exhibitions during his lifetime. And this is a very important resource for the writing of Hong Kong's art history, and something that we are really excited to be sharing with the public. So, you know, we must always be sort of reminded that Ha Baek-chun's material always came from his studio, and we were able to find them from there. And in order to sort of remind us of these sort of transformation, what we did was to work with Sarah and Yutaka, our exhibition architects, to recreate a 3D model of the studio, which you see here. And this particular studio was based on Ha's own documentation of the studio in the 80s, which we reproduced here also for audiences to see. And over the years, Ha Baek-chun's studio transformed, and it again is a reminder for us of how like the materials have changed hands and shifted places. So here you see sort of some photographs of Ha Baek-chun's studio, and he and his friends looking at the different works. And for us, this is fascinating to see how the artists were sort of learning to become a collector of things and an artist, as well as being part of a community through his collection. And the rest of the Archivist Table, what you see are also a selection of books, research materials that we've consulted over the years to inform our research into Ha Baek-chun's archive and our work with scholars and other artists on this archive. One of the contributions here is a zine by our colleagues Samantha Chow and Stephen Lam. And it's actually a complete book list of Ha Baek-chun's personal library. And this book list is possible to be compiled because all of these books now belong to other people. With the blessing of the Habik-Chun family, we've actually given out these books to different people. So on the left, what you see are the book lists, just sort of listed out the titles of a year of publication. And on the right, on these sort of red pages, are people who eventually took these books, their reactions and their thoughts on encountering this collection. The zine has no beginning and no end, which also is much like learning, research, and archiving. And the little green book on the side is part of the set by Banu Toglu called Bewitched, Bewildered, Bothered. It consisted of a series of screenings and talks, but also this sort of translation from Turkish into English for the first time of the Orpheus Double Bind, which is a chapter from a book by the literary critic Nudan Gurbilek. Inside there's exploration of, what does it mean to be working on archive and stuff of people who are no longer, and what does it mean to be channeling these voices, and how do you do that, and what are the politics, etc. And it's a publication that we're very excited to be sort of putting out into the world and sharing with the public. One of the things that sort of we keep thinking about as we work on this exhibition, which starts from Habik-Chun's archive, is, how do you bring the artist back? And how do you address that transformation of the archive from analog into digital as we were scanning different things? So in our discussion, we've actually come up with sort of this video, which in some ways is our imagination of what a scanner would see when it was scanning things. And the scanner in this case is scanning Habik-Chun's manuscripts and drawings. And we've also put in place some shelves, which reminds us of the volume of the archive. Ha eventually's archive amounted to over 600 boxes. And the 30 here are the exact number of the photographic materials that he left behind. And this work you are seeing here in front of you is by Walid Rad, who is the artist who discovered the collage books. But here what you see are these sort of mini Habik-Chun sort of jumping in and jumping out of the boxes. What is very interesting about this work we find is you see Ha being photographed with his work, being photographed with other artists, photographing other people. And then there's this obsessive desire to sort of be part of a chain of events that defines the art world, whether it's art, artists, exhibition viewer, or photography as reproduction. And here you really sort of see this tension stage in 3D form. All of the Habik-Chun figures we've taken from, of course, Ha's archive, and some of the boxes as well. And it's this sort of conversation of you really don't know what Ha wants in terms of trying to be part of the art world, and just being at one place at one time was simply not enough. And so we're going to end the tour here, again looking at the Lo Ting sculpture, sort of standing behind the screen. It was a very precise and sort of intentional decision to have audiences encounter Lo Ting's shadow first before you actually see the sculpture itself. I guess it's a commentary of how we often think of Hong Kong's art and art history, as you almost sort of hear it first as rumors or as a shadow. But the very fact that there is Habik-Chun's archive and there are these very open ways of working with it that builds different narratives sort of challenges this narrative and thinking of disappearance and lack. And it's always like when you walk behind the screen, it's when you discover and you can sort of nurture curiosity. And this is very much what we hope to do with this exhibition. So thank you very much for watching and spending time with us. So, good evening, everyone. Hi, thank you for joining us for the pre-recorded tour of Portal Stories and Other Journeys. My name is Michelle Wong, and I'm the curator for this exhibition, and I'm very happy to be here to take any sort of live questions from the platform. I'm actually here at Tai Kwun Contemporary, so very happy to be sort of doing this on site and happy to take some questions. Okay, so we have some questions. So I'm just going to read out some of the questions and then sort of take it from there. Can you explain more about the exhibition title? Why is it called Portal Stories and Other Journeys? That's a great question. I guess the title comes from sort of this very long sort of deliberation over the years and working with the materials as well as the artists who are activating the archive. And what we realize is that these documents, as well as even the structure of the archive itself, as you open the different boxes, go through different pages, each document or each piece of information is like a portal that leads you to other places. And when you go to other places, what you then happen to do is you recount your stories. And as you tell stories, what you hope to do is to take people on the journey together. And so that's how the title of it come together. Maybe I can also say a little bit about like the Chinese title of it, which is not actually a direct translation for those of you who can read Chinese. It actually then takes this idea of sort of within sort of a very short length, but also before beginning. So that's also sort of our feeling of working with these materials, how actually you can go to very many places in a very short period of time, but also seem to go through a lot in a long period of time, and that's where that's coming from. Okay. So we have a question in Cantonese, which I will read out in Cantonese and also answer in Cantonese. 咁呢個係用廣東話問嘅問題嚟嘅，咁我都會用廣東話去作答啦。佢話點解會研究夏碧泉㗎？佢喺香港藝術史上嘅角色係啲乜嘢咧？其實研究夏碧泉或者夏碧泉嘅檔案啦，係嚟自即係亞洲藝術文獻庫多年以嚟對香港藝術史嘅研究同埋承擔嘅。咁一路知道其實夏碧泉佢本人影咗好多香港由80年代到2000年代期間喺境外同埋境內發生嘅唔同展覽啦。咁就覺得呢一啲資料其實如果為公眾所用嘅話，係可以去書寫香港嘅藝術史嘅。咁所以就係咁樣嘅機緣之下去開始研究夏碧泉嘅檔案。咁而我哋開始研究夏碧泉嘅檔案，其實係由佢哋嘅家人去邀請我哋開始做嘅。咁就其實一路以嚟好多謝佢哋嘅家人嘅支持。咁佢喺香港藝術史上嘅角色咧，咁我講一個故事去回答呢一個問題。呢個係夏碧泉佢其中一個兒子去講嘅，就話其實原來爸爸夏爺夏碧泉佢留低嘅喺香港藝術史裏面嘅唔一定淨係佢嘅作品，可能更加重要嘅係佢留低嘅檔案同埋文獻庫，會一路影響好多代去對香港同埋香港藝術史有興趣嘅人。咁我都贊成Alex 咁樣講嘅，其實可能夏碧泉喺香港藝術史嘅角色其實更加重要，即係除咗佢係一個好重要嘅藝術家之外，更加重要佢係一個即係記錄咗藝術史，而佢過身後佢嘅家人能夠將佢嘅檔案公開俾唔同嘅人去使用，其實係令到佢喺藝術史上嘅角色亦係更加重要。Okay, then I'm switching back to English. And this question is, why don't you hold a solo exhibition of Ha Bik-chun, but instead opted for an archival/group exhibition? That's a great question as well. I think, coming from the institutional mandate of Asia Art Archive is that, AAA, we're invested in the writing of art history, and it's very rare that a single artist or an individual's archive opens you up to a larger art world rather than a single artist's oeuvre or just one person's life. And Ha's archive has this really immense sort of capacity that opens you up to expanded worlds, whether it's through exhibition documentation or through the ephemera that he collected. And therefore, like for us, it has been very important to actually share this world with a larger audience, and therefore the decision to do this as an archival exhibition. And because AAA has always worked with artists, either through residencies and whatnot, to activate the archive. So for us, it seems very natural then to carry on these conversations and also to start new ones with artists, because it's always when you work with artists that you introduce perspectives and things that you may not see being so close to the archive. All right, so it's back to Cantonese questions again. 呢條問題係用廣東話問佢話喺展覽裏面其實有一個盧亭嘅雕像啦，咁其實佢係一個reproduction 嚟嘅，係一個重新做嘅雕像嚟。咁當時其實佢原本嘅雕像係嚟自1998年嘅時候嘅展覽啦，就唔係呢個展覽裡面嘅藝術家受到夏碧泉或者夏碧泉嘅檔案啟發而創作嘅作品。咁點解呢一條魚呢個盧亭會仲喺度呢？即係喺呢個展覽裏面呢？其實呢個都係一個好好嘅問題嚟嘅。咁點解會展出盧亭呢？其實係因為想透過盧亭咁樣嘅去展示，去話俾show俾觀眾睇，其實夏碧泉嘅檔案佢打開咗我哋有機會去使用佢去做研究之後，其實係可以增加我哋對香港藝術史嘅認知。咁所以就希望透過去 restage 點樣講呢？用中文即係去重新去展示一啲我哋已知嘅物件，但係用一啲我哋從來冇試過嘅場景去展示佢哋嘅時候，希望可以加深到觀眾對例如香港藝術史嘅認知咁樣。咁所以其實盧亭係一個盧亭呢個 image 啦，呢個圖像啊，或者呢個 icon 啊，其實第一次出現我哋或者第一次見到咧，係喺夏碧泉嘅攝影裏面，喺佢嘅展覽記錄裏面見到。咁我哋嘅研究過程就因為我哋想去了解多啲盧亭呢一個展覽同埋盧亭呢一個人物背後嘅故事啦。咁我哋就去揾呢一個人物佢而家究竟喺邊。咁然後就喺何慶基嘅辦公室裏面揾到呢一個雕像嘅。咁我哋揾到呢一個雕像嘅時候，我哋就覺得其實係一個平面嘅文獻變成咗一個立體 3D 嘅經歷。咁我哋就希望可以展出盧亭呢一個雕像，等觀眾既可以見到喺呢個 vitrine 裏面嘅文獻啦，亦都見到 vitrine 外面其實亦都有雕像原本嘅原貌咁樣咯。好，有冇其他問題呢？如果冇其他問題呢，咁我哋就多謝咁多位今日同我哋一齊睇展覽啦，又問咗咁多咁好嘅問題。咁我哋呢個展覽就一路去到8月1號嘅，咁希望喺展覽完結之前有機會再見到大家。